Danny, we've seen what happened with one of your best mates in football, Steven Gerrard. Didn't work out for him at Aston Villa after, to some degree, a successful time at Rangers in Glasgow. So nothing going on for him at the moment, in spite of the fact it looks as if he might get the Poland job, and he didn't. Our friend from Portugal got that. And now we've seen another great former player, Frank Lampard, dumped out of Everton. Is it unfair to say that Lampard falls into the Steven Gerrard territory in that both thus far can be considered managerial failures?
I don't know. I don't know if you can say failures. I mean, I think they've failed in their last jobs. That's for sure. What Stevie did at Rangers is certainly not a failure, is it? There's no Rangers fan on the planet who would suggest his tenure was a failure.
There are. Not say it's a failure, but say that he could have achieved more in his time there. I mean, he stopped Celtic winning when he had to stop Celtic winning.
Yeah, so it wasn't a failure. It was reasonably
but in 3
successful.
years, it was one trophy win in 9 attempts.
Yeah, but it was a big one.
But it was a big one.
And the first 18 months, or the first year at least, was a rebuild. So it wasn't... His management tenure, generally, as two jobs go, hasn't been a failure. One has and one hasn't. The fact he got the Villa job suggests the Rangers job was a success, because not many Premier League clubs are giving out managers' jobs to failures, are they?
No, that's true.
The Lampard... I thought Lampard did well at Chelsea, considering. I thought he did all right. They were they had the embargo. They brought some of the young lads through. The football was decent. They had some good results. I think he did as well as could be expected. I know it was a big job, but I think he did all right.
That argument, Danny's, the guy went on and won the Champions League 4 months later with the same squad.
Yeah, by being a pragmatist and playing a certain style to get through winning a competition. Lampard might have won it.
You got and might be my uncle, but it was the way it was going at that time. It wasn't that way. They were poor under Frank.
I think most Chelsea fans would say his tenure was all right.
Towards the
back end, you're always going to have a bad spell on the back end.
So the point is, he wouldn't have gone on to win the Champions League on the basis of what he was leaving Chelsea with, because his performance.
That's not what I was asked. I was asked about his managerial career being a failure. But what he did at Derby.
Well, let's recharacterise it then, because these are elite players and elite names.
Yeah.
Premier League. They are failures in the Premier League.
Who are?
Both of them.
Oh, Lampard and Gerrard. Mm-hmm. They have failed in the last jobs, yeah.
No, they're the only jobs they've got in the Premier League. Let's talk about the Premier League. Let's forget about Scotland. Talk about all the lone players that went to Derby and got you to playoffs that you lost, right? Let's talk about the Premier League, which is where they want to be. They don't want to manage in the Championship.
Correct.
They don't want to manage in Scotland. They want to manage in the Premier League, because their name and their reputation precedes them on the basis of being a player, and put them in the space where we judge them. And we judge them in the Premier League. That then characterisation has to take you into the territory of both of them currently have failed.
I mean, how do both their reputations look at this time, Danny?
Not great. If you want another Premier League job, I don't think that's going to happen.
So they failed on a Premier League basis. They'll get other managerial jobs, but the characterisation question may not be to your liking, but it isn't inaccurate. They are both failures in the Premier League.
I said Gerrard's last job was a failure. He's only had one in the Premier League, so that would ring true. Right, you're just repeating what I said. In terms of Lampard...
what you did was you back-channeled it by saying, well, look what he did in Rangers. Forget what he did in Rangers.
We can't forget.
Well, you can, because we're talking about what their main focus in life was not to end up in Rangers and not to end up in Derby. It was to end up in the Premier League, right? So let's look them in through that prism. And in that prism, they're failures.
And that leads to the next question, Danny. What is next for both of these guys? I know it's early days for Frank, but not for Steven. He must be thinking, time I get back into it. Where is it?
I think it's going to have to be either Championship or abroad.
Can you see him wanting to do that? You know the personalities.
I would suggest that I would actually. I would.
They would accept that as a rebuild.
I think they'd have to, but I think they would in terms of their personality traits, because I don't think they're quitters, and I don't think they're at a point in their life where they want to go and sit in the studio and do this. So, it could even be something as outside the box that Scotty Parker's done. Stevie got linked with the Poland job recently, didn't he? Which was a strange one, but there's gonna be opportunities, but they're going to have to be careful not to be too fussy, because the big opportunities aren't going to come along until they go and prove themselves again.
I mean, it's cruel to say it, but some would argue they found their level, and it's not the Premier League. Others appear to be suited to the Premier League that never had the playing reputation or career of either Lampard or Gerrard.
If you take away the playing reputation and just look at managers and if they're successful or not and how that journey goes, there's going to be failure along the way for even the top managers. Not many have there'll be a few who have gone from there to the top quickly and stayed there, but not many. If you look at the job Eddie Howe's doing now, he spent how many years in the lower leagues in Bournemouth? Went to Burnley and failed. So after he failed at Burnley, the first time he left Bournemouth, which was his safe haven, after he failed in the Burnley job, would we be sitting here now saying he would ever be? He'd gone back to Bournemouth, by the way. Would he ever be a manager who's going to be talked about running a Champions League club, getting a team in the Champions League, or even possibly the next England manager?
But I think they're unique circumstances with Eddie Howe, because everyone will give Eddie Howe the pass that with a club like Bournemouth that's got no particular spending power, it's got 10,000 fans, and is actually quite privileged to be in the Premier League, that they would have given Eddie that pass, that actually he worked the oracle. He kept him in the Premier League, and actually he did miracles to keep them there. And of course, after 5 or 6 years, you're going to reach that point where the wheels are going to come off. So Eddie would have walked out of Bournemouth.
But he hadn't done all that when he left Burnley.
No, I understand that. But he went back to Bournemouth, which is where he was known. Now, there was no other jobs for him in that particular scenario, because he went back to the place he was known.
Yeah, and proved himself.
So when he's coming out of the analogy you're creating is that he has not necessarily been given. You'd never envisaged Eddie Howe now landing an opportunity on the back of some of the things that he has had to endure. But I think you could actually examine those in a different way and say, well, Bournemouth, he went on a journey with them because he played for them. He took them into a Premier League. He did it for 6 years. And of course, in the middle of that was a Burnley situation. He only got another job because it was back to the place that he achieved him. He stayed there, kept him in a situation when most people thought that Bournemouth staying in the Premier League wasn't achievable. Lost his job, but still came out with a reputation that ultimately was based upon a framework of a particular club. And then Newcastle's journey is unique because they've got
but the point is what? So my point is that you sometimes, if you have to go backwards to take steps forward, and you can still succeed after that. The narrative I'm getting at the moment is Lampard and Gerrard are done.
How did he take a step back?
By going back to Bournemouth.
Right.
After Burnley.
What many
step back in it, because he was at Bournemouth, then went to Burnley. Then he went backwards because he's gone back to where he started.
Okay. What many are saying, Danny, like there's Joseph, who's one of many, listening to this lunchtime. You might not like it, mate, but it's coming your way. Is it not true to say that the old Pals Act is alive and well in football? You do find it tough to criticise the likes of Lampard, do you not?
You find it tough to criticise the likes
of Gerrard.
His last job was a failure. Is that not criticism?
Joseph saying that Danny just won't have much criticism of Lampard. He said he didn't do a bad job at Chelsea.
He didn't.
Simon points out that his successor won the Champions League 4 months after he got signed.
So if your successor does well, that means you didn't do a good job. Is that the narrative of that message?
But if your successor's given a whole raft of different tools, then you can have that argument. If your successor just picks up the baton that you left him with and goes and wins the Champions League 4 months later, it's pretty compelling, isn't it? And starts putting the players that you didn't want, Rudiger, and people like you just went having you, and then makes them a cornerstone of a team that goes and wins the Champions League. It leaves you in a slightly invidious position, doesn't it?
You can look at it how you want. I mean, if Pep had picked an half-decent normal team in that final sales, you wouldn't have won it. All these different things.
Okay. All right.
Rafa Benitez won the Champions League at Liverpool this first season, finished 6th in the league, and had 9 of his players who were Houlier's. So is Rafa a good or bad manager? Was Houllier crap? Well, I don't get. It's a ridiculous argument.
Well, how's it a ridiculous argument?
Because what you're saying is Lampard's poor because the successor came in, and 4 months later, after playing 4 or 5 games in a Champions League campaign, 6 games after he left.
Yeah.
That proves the previous manager was awful.
No, I'm just saying. I never said it was awful. I said he failed. I didn't bring awful into
the conversation. But he might have won it if he stayed.
Okay, on the direction of. I mean, I don't know if I'm banging my head against the wall here. Chelsea in the last sort of 6 weeks of Frank were really poor. Right, so there's no indication that you can make an argument besides being a contrarian. And that's ironic coming from me, by the way, that Frank Lampard was going to go and win a Champions League. You know that's a silly argument. No, he probably wouldn't have. You know that Tuchel was the real deal because you said it yourself.
Was Roberto Di Matteo the real deal?
No, of course not.
But he won a Champions League.
Okay, I understand we can go whataboutery, but we're comparing Frank Lampard to an instantaneous set of circumstances.
But you're comparing it. You're comparing what Tuchel did in the short period he came in and when he won it to what Frank did over a period of time at Chelsea under different circumstances.
I'm saying that the same group of players without any step change suddenly became players that punched their way up the Premier League, suddenly became players that were a cohesive unit, and suddenly became players that went through the European competition, winning games in the 16s, the quarterfinals, the semi-finals.
Yeah, would Tuchel have done a better job than Frank if he'd been given the job when Frank was given it? The answer is probably yes.
Yes.
But did Frank do a decent job considering it was...
He did okay, didn't he?
He did, that's what I said.
Okay.
When will we see either of them again, Simon?
What do you think, Jim?
Gerrard or Lampard?
I mean, I think
I'm surprised we haven't seen Gerrard before now.
Well, I think that Danny's point is probably the most salient point, is they're going to have to accept the reality of their circumstances because they aren't going to be offered a Premier League job. There's no reason for them to be offered a Premier League job. I thought it was an immense leap from Aston Villa to offer him the job in the first place. When I saw him down here, I got more of the fact that, I get it, he's got a little bit of gravitas about him, but gravitas covers you so far if you've got no tactical nous behind it, and he didn't seem to have that. So I think he's in a slightly difficult position because where does it land him? I'm looking at the Championship, and if I was in the Championship, honestly, with no controversy trying to be courted or clickbait,
I know it's coming.
I wouldn't look at either of them either.
Would you not?
No, I'd go, well, what for? A, you know about the Premier League, you've played in it. B, you know bugger all about the Championship. So what am I going to get from you besides potential leadership, which you've shown me you actually can't deliver?
Vincent Kompany, Michael Carrick might disprove that.
Vincent Kompany spent 3 years managing Anderlecht, and despite our disagreement, he took Anderlecht to a better position than they were when he went there. In a league that, I again will concur with you that it's not actually a particularly competitive league, but I think he's a completely different character than Gerrard and Lampard. He just strikes me as a different character. And to go and manage in Anderlecht, come back and take Burnley when they were relegated, prepared to go from an elite league to a Championship league on the basis of the fact he can get Burnley back and change their style of play, I think tells you what Vincent Kompany really is.
Well, he looks like a real deal, but if he took Burnley up and stayed with them, and then they got spanked every week, and they got relegated, you could argue he's failed in the Premier League. It doesn't make him a bad manager,
No, because then you'd look at what Burnley had to go into the Premier League with against what they were competing against, how much they spent. If he went in there and he was given 150 million quid and was able to really have a go and rock and roll when he stunk the place out, then you'd say he was a failure. But if he was given 50 million quid and a bunch of free transfers and a bunch of players that weren't good enough for the Premier League, then you couldn't have that argument, could you?
Okay, so Lampard and Gerrard out of the game at the moment, but for how long?
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.